Tonight, we open the door to ancient Rome, a world not only full of cold steel warriors and proud leaders, but also a place where humans spent thousands of years experimenting, creating, and sometimes doing things so bizarre that they surpass modern imagination. If you enjoy fascinating historical stories that are still spicy enough to make you think, then you've come to the right place. Before we begin the adventure, you can support me by subscribing and watching the video until the end. Because honestly, the ending is always where the most surprising secrets are revealed. And don't hesitate to share in the comments where and at what time you're watching. The feeling of seeing a community from all over the world gathering in the evening is truly wonderful. Now, sit down, turn off the lights, and let the fan and background music carry you into ancient Rome in a way you've never experienced before. Let's begin, shall we? If you want to understand how ancient Rome truly operated, then temporarily forget those dry history lectures in the classroom. Because behind the solemn statues of gods and libraries full of scrolls is an empire where people constantly lived in a state slightly detached from reality. And the interesting thing is, no one found it strange. They considered it an essential part of life, just like we regard morning coffee as indispensable to starting a new day. The Romans were the same, only instead of caffeine, they used mixtures that made it hard to be sure whether what you were seeing was real or not. And when you step into their world, a world fueled by wine so strong it could be considered an ancient fuel, you begin to understand why Rome could both build magnificent structures and simultaneously fall into quirky habits that make modern people laugh. Romans didn't drink wine just for entertainment. They saw it as part of the social system, a lubricant for the spirit, and sometimes as a way to negotiate with the gods. A Roman entered a feast not to eat. Food was secondary. What mattered was the cup and what was allowed to be poured into that cup. Imagine you are sitting in a marble-floored room, the light from oil lamps flickering against the walls. You are served a glass of wine that the host describes proudly. This one is brewed with resin, soaked flowers mixed with pepper, and combined with a plant whose name I am not sure of, but the seller says it opens the doors of the soul. You look at the wine, think about your own soul's door, then decide to sip lightly, and just 5 minutes later you feel as if the ceiling has started to breathe. The funny thing is, for the Romans, this was a completely normal experience, but wine was only the beginning. What made Rome a massive laboratory of the ancient world was the treasury of herbs and mixtures they confidently used as if they were modern doctors with full knowledge of biological science. In reality, they trusted intuition more than knowledge. If a plant smelled good, they added it to wine. If a root looked like a human foot, they crushed and drank it. If a leaf had once been used by someone in Persia to see an expanded horizon, the Romans decided to add it to their kitchen spice list. And so Rome became the only empire in history where you could get a headache from looking at the sun too brightly. But when you went to a doctor for treatment, the doctor would give you a mixture that made you forget who you were for 10 minutes. Honestly, at times, the Romans cured illness by making you temporarily cease to exist. The important thing is they did all of this very seriously. None of them thought these were dangerous experiments. On the contrary, they believed that whatever nature granted must have a reason. If a plant made you sleep deeply as if dead, that was a blessing from the god Morpheus. If a resin made you see colors that didn't exist, that was a message from Jupiter. And if a root temporarily removed you from physical consciousness, they saw it as an opportunity for the soul to travel. Some mixtures were used so commonly they almost became culture. Take temples, for example. Imagine you go to pray expecting serenity, but instead of peace, you enter a closed room filled with smoke from a resin that today we might call a mild hallucinogen. You sit down, the priest begins to bless, and 10 minutes later, you completely believe that the statue is looking back at you with a compassionate gaze. The Romans considered this a sacred experience. Modern researchers call it inhaling in a closed space. But not everything served religious or medicinal purposes. Some herbs were used by Romans simply because they enjoyed the thrill. The lavish parties of the aristocracy were not about gourmet food, but a playground off the strongest, strangest wines. A skilled host was not the one with the best chef, but the one who could make guests nod in amazement or stagger through a special wine mixture. That was how they impressed. That was the art of hospitality in the Roman style. If you dig deeper, you'll see that the entire Roman society operated on one principle. They believed that spiritual life was connected to material life. Drinking something potent could elevate you. Inhaling a fragrance could connect you with the divine. Immersing yourself in herbs could expand your mind. They didn't think they were doing something crazy. They thought they were living as fully as possible. And in retrospect, you see the wonder. Rome existed for centuries not only through military discipline, but through an overly indulgent spiritual culture, where people both built lasting monuments and immersed themselves in experiences that made them question reality. Perhaps it was precisely this contradiction between logic and emotion, between order and chaos, that created the true power of ancient Rome. And because of that, they left us not only architecture, law, or philosophy, but also a portrait that is very human, strong, curious, and daring in a way few can imitate. As you delve deeper into the world of these mysterious rituals, you begin to realize that ancient Rome was not just an empire of roads, warriors, and philosophers. It was also a massive spiritual laboratory where people experimented with their consciousness as if they were sampling a new wine. And while the modern world debates whether meditation or yoga can improve mental health, the Romans solved the problem by adding a suspicious amount of smoke, a few herbs that made you detach from your body, and a priest standing so close to the brazier that his robe could catch fire. For the Romans, a spiritual experience was not something to ponder, it was something you inhaled. And because of this, mysterious cults continued to become destinations for those who felt society was too cramped, too strict, or taxed too heavily. You have to understand that Rome was an empire of laws. They had laws about property, laws about clothing, laws about marriage, laws about how to build a bridge, and even laws about who was allowed to sit where in the circus. For an ordinary citizen, there were times you just wanted to escape it all, escape expectations, responsibilities, and especially neighbors who like to gossip. And then you hear about a cult where everything is hidden under torchlight, where identities dissolve in music and chants, where you can drink a blessed cup of wine without anyone asking which class you come from. Those who came here were not mad. They were ordinary Romans, people craving a deeper connection with themselves, with the universe, or simply seeking a space to cry without judgment. Altering consciousness for them was not rebellion, it was a journey. But not every cult immersed itself in the golden light of spiritual uplift. Some mysterious rituals actually pushed participants to strange limits of the human mind. On special nights, you would be led into enclosed rooms illuminated only by a few glowing coals. The smoke was so dense that you couldn't tell where a person ended and a wall began. Priests would recount stories of reincarnation, transcendence, and the trials the soul must endure. And when the herbal mixtures began to take effect, you didn't just hear the story, you saw it. Some claimed they saw themselves stepping through a radiant doorway into a breathtaking realm. Others said they saw ancestors appear just to nod in approval. Others described the sensation of their body melting, as if they were becoming part of the trees, the earth, and the universe itself. To modern scholars, all of this sounds more like a biochemical reaction than a miracle, but to the Romans, compelling evidence that the gods were still listening. One of the things that made these cults so appealing was the oath of secrecy. No one, under any circumstances, was allowed to reveal what happened during the night. This not only created thrilling suspense, it also made the experience feel more sacred. Something happened only between you and the divine, a personal moment too intimate to put into words. Of course, the oath of secrecy was also a clever way to keep the Senate from knowing exactly what you had consumed. And you have to imagine the beautiful contradiction in Roman society. By day, people might debate Stoic philosophy, emotional control, reason, and ethics. But when the sun set, many of them abandoned rational life to immerse themselves in experiences that broke all boundaries, where emotions were not only allowed to erupt but encouraged. Rome was an empire of discipline and also an empire of transcendence. Even the aristocracy, those bound by millions of social rules, sought out these rituals. Because when you are a governor managing three provinces, there are days when you just want to run away from all responsibilities. And when an invitation arrives from a mysterious cult offering you a night to purify the soul, rebirth the spirit, and attain clarity, you nod without hesitation. It is noteworthy that these rituals were not fringe activities. They were not considered heretical, as some modern societies might view them. On the contrary, they were regarded as a legitimate part of spiritual life. The Romans believed that human consciousness had many layers, and sometimes you had to shake those layers to find the truth. And if the truth happened to emerge after a bit of strong incense, well, so be it. Gradually, these cults became places for people to reclaim the emotions that daily life had crushed. They came to understand themselves, to release sorrow, to shed guilt, and to feel part of something greater. And that, regardless of the era, is a very human need. The truth is, Rome could not function on reason alone. It lived through belief, ritual, and moments of transcendence, and it was precisely this mixture of harsh practicality and lavish spiritual life that created a complex, contradictory empire that was impossible not to be captivated by. If you think things have already become crazy enough with opium, belladonna, and parties sparkling like a chemistry lab, then congratulations, you've only seen the light culinary side of ancient Rome, because the Romans didn't stop at mixing psychoactive substances into their wine. They turned their entire living spaces into large-scale sensory experiments. And the pinnacle of creativity, or folly, depending on how you look at it, was the experience environments that the elite created to make life feel more magical. It wasn't just incense burning, it wasn't just steam. We're talking about a class of elites who had both the time and money to ask a question that every modern scientist hates. What happens if you mix everything together? The result? Some nights you would see solemn, divine senators, dignified by day, sitting in a dark room filled with aromatic smoke, engaging in deep debates with a clay pot. On other nights, you might see a noble woman whispering to a flame as if it had just offered marital advice. All of it was applied science by the loosest Roman definition. The wealthy especially loved turning their homes into comprehensive experience destinations. A proper elite Roman villa didn't just have a dining room, steam room, or art gallery. It also had an emotion room, a fragrance room, a resin burning room, and sometimes a dark room dedicated to advanced meditation activities, a refined term describing a state in which many guests were trying to remember who they were, and that was just indoors. Step out into the garden behind, and you could see servants burning herbs so potent that modern historians can only describe them with one word: acrid. The scent swirled up into the night air, mingling with the breezy evening atmosphere. Guests leaned back on soft chairs, sipping wine, believing they were silently contemplating philosophy. In reality, they were just trying to remember why the moon had two tails. Most interestingly, the Romans did not hide any of this. They wrote about it, talked about it, and even bragged about it. A Roman host might greet guests with, "Welcome. Today my Egyptian incense blend is 6 months old, very gentle, and won't cause strong hallucinations unless you stand right by the brazier." A sincere, polite warning that was completely reassuring to nobody. Remember, these parties were not a few isolated cases. They were a trend. A reputable host wanting to prove that he was sophisticated, wealthy, and up to date could not merely serve fine wine and imported fruit. No, he had to provide a luminous space, soft incense smoke, mild aromatic stimulants, and just enough herbal vapor to make guests lose track of time without losing their wallets. Another interesting aspect lay in the philosophical debates that arose from this. Participants, after absorbing sufficient luxury fragrances, often entered a state that the Romans called mind openness, a flowery expression for a state in which every passing idea sounded profound. A simple statement like, "that lamp glows," could be analyzed for 40 continuous minutes, with someone ready to swear because they believed the light carried a message from Apollo. And while the elite celebrated in rooms full of hallucinatory smoke, the Roman authorities seemed largely unconcerned. You might wonder, didn't the Senate worry? No regulations? The answer? No. Rome had laws for almost everything. even which seats were assigned when buying tickets for the races, but they had no law on how much ambiguous herbal smoke a noble could burn in his own house. Perhaps the only surprising thing here is that all of this happened openly without anyone considering it a problem. To the Romans, this was not antisocial or substance abuse in the modern sense. It was a legitimate reward for people with lives full of pressure, responsibilities, and too many political enemies. Rome was not only an empire of discipline, it was also an empire of flowing, magical nights filled with strange herbs. But don't get me wrong, not all Romans enjoyed this. Some conservative philosophers saw these smoke filled parties as a symbol of decay. They wrote long, very long books analyzing why the Romans were losing the strong nature of their ancestors. However, humorously, many of these same philosophers are recorded as using opium for philosophical contemplation. Classic, I oppose it, but I still use it. What makes the story even more interesting is the coexistence of two worlds. By day, Rome was a cold steel empire, legions marching, strict laws, rational philosophy, and great military strategies. But when night fell, the empire shed its stern exterior to reveal a soul, soft, dreamy, and sometimes obscured by aromatic smoke. And it is precisely this contrast that makes Rome a civilization both strong and fragile, rational and emotional. The Romans didn't just live, they experienced, sometimes excessively, and they built an entire system of life around the need to temporarily escape the stresses they themselves created while ruling half the world. We often regard ancient Rome as a civilization of conquests and grand structures, but it was also these same people, the builders of arenas, lawmakers, and conquerors of the world, who reclined on couches, inhaled hazy incense, and spoke of destiny in a very relaxed state. And if you think that was the limit of creativity in altering mental states, oh no. Wait until the next part, where the Romans decided that air alone was not enough. They had to manipulate water, sound, and light to transform an ordinary evening into a complete sensory voyage. When it comes to Roman emperors and their strange relationships with psychoactive substances, many people immediately think of lavish banquets, overflowing cups of wine, and bewildering actions recorded by posterity with a sense of helplessness. But to truly grasp their dangerous level, we must step outside familiar frameworks and look at how the Roman ruling class regarded stimulants as part of royal life, sometimes as a tool for relaxation, sometimes as a source of inspiration, and sometimes as something that pushed dangerous decisions beyond reasonable limits. Because while ordinary Romans dared to experiment only in the kitchen, the bath, or small gatherings, the emperors did it on an imperial scale. When someone holds gold and silver, power, an army, a personal philosopher, a storyteller, and even a chef specialized in brewing wine to suit the mood, risk no longer deters them. They didn't just enjoy rare mushrooms, they pursued them like some modern collectors chase NFTs, curious, reckless, and hoping to step into some enlightened dimension. Typically, the Roman elite held all night banquets where food was only a small part. The sensation was what mattered. Herbs soaked in wine were offered as gifts. Incense burners mixed with resin that stimulated the mind were lit to expand vision. And fantastical tales of strange substances from the East were passed along as secrets to approach the divine realm. For them, the line between religion, philosophy, and entertainment was sometimes only a thin wisp of smoke. Some emperors even turned herb experimentation into a favored routine in the palace. Records indicate they believed certain substances could make them stronger, smarter, or more deeply connected with the empire's protective gods. And in a Rome constantly shrouded in omens, prophecies, and rituals, it was not surprising that emperors sought to enhance their spiritual sensitivity using strange mixtures. Though sometimes the results resembled a forced theatrical performance more than a soul searching journey. These emperors also never lacked practitioners willing to concoct anything on request, as long as it was novel or potentially divine, according to rumors. And since herbalists of the time could not clearly distinguish what was medicine, what was poison, what caused mild hallucinations, and what could trigger a 3-day spiritual journey, they simply followed intuition and the emperor's purse. Some mixtures induced deep relaxation. Others could make the user perceive the world as melting around them. But one thing was certain: no one dared tell the emperor, "Perhaps your majesty should stop." The atmosphere of the Roman palace sometimes resembled a bizarre laboratory where people competed to test new extracts, strange mushrooms, or ointments from distant lands. These experiments occasionally sparked spontaneous decisions, from appointing an official simply because of a strange aura around him to issuing decrees that anyone reading them would feel were written after a sleepless night and 3 pots of hallucinogenic incense. Yet, it is undeniable that these consciousness altering experiences also shaped the spiritual life of the emperor and court. In a political environment always tense, where death could come with a frown from a minister, many emperors turned to stimulants as a way to escape pressure. Some even believed that in those altered moments of awareness, they could see the future of the empire or receive guidance from the gods. Of course, this was sometimes just hallucination, but it did not make them believe any less. These substances did not remain confined to the palace. They influenced policy, rituals, and sometimes the course of Roman history. An inspired emperor could reward thousands in a single afternoon or issue decisions that made historians centuries later scratch their heads. Why did they do that? A mistaken mushroom feast could trigger unexpected upheaval in the court. An overdose of herbal incense therapy could turn a political meeting into a chaotic philosophical debate about the meaning of life. Perhaps the most astonishing aspect is how Roman society regarded all this as normal. When an emperor believed he had just conversed with Jupiter after inhaling too much herbal incense, no one dared object. When an advisor suddenly had a trance like idea while using a hallucinogenic ointment, sometimes that idea became state policy. And when philosophers were invited to interpret the emperor's new vision, they did so with absolute seriousness, careful not to offend his majesty. The world of ancient Rome was complex, chaotic, and dazzling. And within that brilliance, stimulants, from herbal wines to exotic mushrooms, served as a bridge between truth and legend, between the mundane and the apocalyptic, between humans and forces beyond their understanding. They were not merely party spices. They were part of culture, spirituality, and sometimes of collapse. Rome was built not only from stone, but also from moments of shimmering, strange, and often dangerously vivid consciousness. If there is one thing that made the medieval crossbowman's craft unlike any other soldier's trade, it was the peculiar combination of mechanical precision and the sudden chaos of the battlefield. You didn't just have to fight the enemy. You also had to contend with fog, rain, the bowstring, spinning wheels, and sometimes the crossbow itself deciding not to obey you anymore. And here's the fun part: everyone would always blame you. Miss a shot? Your fault. String breaks? Your fault. Wind changes direction? Still your fault. If a knight gets pierced through the armor by a crossbow bolt and falls from his horse, oh, that one is your sin before God. Congratulations, you've just become a threat of nature. On most days, you would feel like you were working with a machine determined to destroy your spirit rather than the enemy. The crossbow by nature is a moody child. A little dampness and it sulks, a little dust in the groove and it goes on strike, and if you don't maintain it properly, it will retaliate by snapping the string straight into your face. Nothing brightens your day quite like being taught a lesson in humility by your own weapon. And then, when everything finally obeys, the string taut like a violin, the bolt groove clean as a monk's hand, the trigger mechanism smooth, you still aren't allowed to rejoice. Because by then, the enemy is watching you. The opposing archer eyes you as if you've stolen his livelihood. The knights look at you as if you're devaluing the armor they spent a year's wages on. The generals see you as a device that must be used at the right moment, in the right place, but never too close because they fear the string snapping into their face. Your life thus becomes a series of moments between today I will achieve a miracle and today I will die because this mechanical device is angry with me. Let's look at the most crucial task of this trade: spanning the crossbow. Many people think the crossbow is a weapon for the weak, too feeble to draw a bow. Completely wrong. Spanning a crossbow requires muscles, technique, and patience that even the Virgin Mary would nod in approval. You plant your foot on the stirrup, bend down like a farmer pulling a turnip, and use all your strength to pull the string onto the latch. Your back creaks, your hands tremble, and you feel as if you are performing a soul summoning ritual rather than preparing a shot. Not to mention, every span is a prayer. If the string slips, you take the full hit in the face. If the stirrup breaks, you crash to the ground. If someone accidentally walks by and kicks you, congratulations, you have another reason to hate humanity. After firing a few bolts, the string slackens, and you return to the old routine. Check, adjust, mutter curses, and continue. Meanwhile, the swordsman beside you just grabs his metal bar and charges straight at the opponent like a bull. And you must perform a sequence of intricate, meticulous, precise maneuvers, all fraught with risk of self-injury. If the ancients had a trade called dedicated but cursed, it would be crossbowmen. But of course, the most rewarding part of the craft comes when you are finally allowed to shoot. Then you stand or crouch, kneel, or find a suitably elevated rock and aim. You aim at the enemy like a master artist. You adjust for wind, distance, humidity, and even the mood of the crossbow. Then you squeeze the trigger. The thwip sounds, and in that moment, you become the figure every knight fears. Because the crossbow bolt doesn't care if you are noble. It doesn't care if you spent 300 gold coins on your armor. It only flies forward to do what it was born to do, pierce everything. And that is why the church once tried to ban the crossbow. It disrupted the social order. A peasant could bring down a knight without rank, lineage, or oaths of loyalty. That terrified the nobility. In a world where centuries of tradition could be undone by someone trained for just 3 weeks, the crossbow became a symbol of injustice or fairness, depending on which side you stood. But beneath all the danger, responsibility, and hatred from all sides, the crossbowman's trade has its own brilliance. You are the embodiment of transformation in warfare. You are a symbol of technological progress. You are the one who makes knights reconsider their lives. You are the reason castles are built taller, walls thicker, arrow slits narrower. You force an entire continent to adapt. And in a long, exhausting day, amidst soldiers' groans, camp clamor, and the indescribable smell of damp armor, you can feel this clearly. No matter who hates you, they still need you. Without the crossbow, the army is weaker. Without you, invaders advance further. And without that painfully precise skill, history would have taken a different course. And that is what makes you, the medieval crossbowman, one of the most important figures that few are willing to acknowledge. A person living on the edge of mechanics, strategy, and survival. A person who understands that sometimes just one bolt fired at the right moment, at the right angle, with heaven's will, is enough to change the course of war. If the medieval world is a giant chessboard, you are not the king, not the queen, not the knight. You are a pawn, armed with a bolt-shooting weapon, and that makes you priceless. When you stand behind the pavises, people often forget an important truth. The battlefield is a chaotic matrix of sound, smell, and motion, where any mistake can end you in an instant. You are not only facing the enemy, you are confronting every element around you. Rain turns the bow into a twisting toy, mud clings to wheels and latches, wind plays dance with the arrows. If you are a crossbowman, every step on the battlefield is like walking a tightrope, dozens of meters high, eyes wide, hands trembling, heart beating, each pulse emphasizing the fragility of life. A skilled crossbowman understands that his rhythm of life is determined by patience, not speed. While longbowmen shoot 10 arrows per minute like a rainstorm, you shoot 1, 2, 3, but each shot is a decision of destiny. For a precise arrow does not just pierce armor, it pierces layers of power, ideologies, and every illusion of safety the knight once carried. A well-timed arrow can bring down someone foolishly confident, turning a hero into a classic cautionary tale for generations to come. But before that arrow leaves the crossbow, you must go through the ritual of perfection. First comes checking the bow. Every string is like a living creature, sensitive to moisture, temperature, and even your gaze. You inspect the latch, adjust the tension of the stirrup lever, take a deep breath, and track your target with your eyes. All these actions take place in tense silence, except for muttering, cursing, and sometimes the growls of the pavesier, the loyal companion to your massive shield. The pavises are your refuge, but also something you must coordinate with precisely. Tilt it wrong, and you could shoot your own shield, and the pavesier will certainly put you on the untrustworthy list for life. Meanwhile, the battlefield around you moves to the rhythm of chaos. Arrows fly through the air, metal clashes, shouts ring out, horses gallop. You must recognize every movement, every sound like a conductor leading a chaotic symphony where the smallest mistake carries incalculable consequences. Sometimes you must pause, breathe, and realize the enemy hasn't noticed your presence, and that is your power, an existence in the shadows where each heartbeat is an opportunity, each breath a weapon. The next step is loading the bolt. This is no easy task. You rotate the lever, place the bolt in the groove, hold the bow tight, then lower your hands as if cradling a mischievous child. An average crossbowman faces countless risks: the string slipping, mud entering the groove, gusts of wind, the stirrup slipping, or simply a teammate bumping into you. But when the bolt is finally secured, the world seems to pause. This moment, amid chaos and danger, is the reward for all the patience, practice, and sophisticated strategy you've invested. Each arrow leaving the crossbow is a declaration of power and precision. You do not shoot randomly, you choose your target. An overly confident knight, a prominent rider, or even the strongest horse, all are considered carefully. When the arrow strikes, time slows. Space opens to a staggering moment. The enemy is surprised, allies astonished, and the pavasier breathes a relieved sigh. A crossbowman understands that victory does not come from strength, but from ruthless accuracy. Yet nothing guarantees long-term safety. The bow is capricious. Rain, dew, mud, snow, all are silent enemies. You learn to read the weather like a book, anticipating each drop of water, each gust of wind, for a single small factor can send your arrow astray. You become an unofficial meteorologist, a survival engineer, and sometimes a tragic artist, turning every morning into a tense, dramatic play. And then, amidst all danger, amidst laughter and groans, you realize the essence. The power of the crossbowman lies not just in the arrow or the mechanism, but in the ability to survive, observe, coordinate, and make precise decisions amid chaos. You are the one the enemy fears, the one your allies depend on, and the pavasier, the living shield, respects. You need no titles or badges, for the power you hold comes from skill, patience, and the ability to turn a chaotic battlefield into your own playground. Your weapon changes tactics. It forces the army to adapt. It makes knights and archers rethink their approach. It transforms every battle into a test of intellect, coordination, and patience. You do not just shoot an arrow, you strike at the structure of society, the habits of combat, and the logic of the medieval world. When everything around you is in chaos, you maintain rhythm, aim at your target, and make all who underestimate you acknowledge. The crossbowman is not merely a profession, but an art, a science, and a power all in one form. Ultimately, you understand that the battlefield is a place to challenge yourself. You do not just survive, you prove that skill, meticulousness, and patience are stronger than brute force or noble titles. Each arrow that leaves the crossbow is a message. Finesse defeats aggression, patience defeats haste, and a true crossbowman always finds his way. After surviving the nightmare march, sweat soaking your shirt, dirt crusted on your face, and every muscle screaming for rest, you finally reach the battlefield. But don't be mistaken, this is not where the hard part ends. If it were, all the battles exploding in your imagination would be a joke. In reality, this is when the crossbowman must demonstrate superhuman survival skills. The next 30 seconds, sometimes only a few seconds, can determine your very existence. Everything happens too fast, yet you must remain absolutely calm. Every movement, every breath, every lift of the crossbow must be calculated down to the last detail. A small mistake, a mile lost. You take a breath. You take a breath, crouch behind the pavas, and try to ignore the arrows flying like storms. The smell of smoke, horses, mud mixed with the acrid scent of bodies nearly makes you vomit. But you cannot. Not allowed. A crossbowman is not permitted to vomit on the battlefield. It is part of the art of survival, and anyone daring to judge you for it would quickly realize that they could not comprehend the pressure of a single arrow needing to strike something worth more than your life. You observe. You measure distance, gauge the wind, sense the vibration of the earth, and study your targets. An arrogant knight swings his sword as if he belongs in a heroic tale. Another rider guards his horse, unaware that the very animal could become a target. Foot soldiers block the way, but they do not matter. Not now. You need to find a gap, a weakness only a crossbowman could notice. Imperfect armor, a loose seam, a spike mounted on a horse. These details are all your weapons, all your power in the 10 most critical seconds. At this point, coordination with the Pavisier becomes a matter of survival. He is not just a shield, he is a clock, a guide, a reminder that every second counts. Tilt too early, and you shoot yourself in the face. Tilt too late, and you miss your target while exposing yourself to the next arrow. This is a dance, an extremely sensitive synchronization that only seasoned crossbowmen understand. Every movement is calculated, and in this moment, you are no ordinary human. You are the center of all action, the fulcrum around which the battlefield pivots. Then the first arrow flies. The thunk echoes, a deadly message amid the chaos. The target is hit or missed, but the sense of achieving that moment is immensely satisfying. A knight falls, a horse neighs, infantry falters, and the pavisier yells, a shout both jubilant and anxious. Just one arrow, but the impact is tremendous. For a moment, the battlefield seems to pause. Your heartbeat races, yet remains calm. You understand the power of a crossbowman. Quantity is irrelevant, precision is everything. But there is no time to celebrate. Only seconds later, a volley from the enemy arrives, and you must dive behind the pavis, lift the crossbow, rotate the lever, reload. Each action accompanied by the creak of mechanisms, muttered curses, and the pavisier's groans. Every sense is taut like a bowstring. Mud sticks to your shoes, drizzle swells the string, and the wind swirls as if to toy with your fate. But you have no choice. Every passing second is a life or death decision, every moment a survival equation. Suddenly, a careless knight steps into your line of fire. No time for long thought. You aim, take a breath, and release the arrow. In this moment, you become the embodiment of skill, patience, and perfectly calculated ruthlessness. The arrow pierces armor, disrupts the enemy formation, and you retreat behind the shield, preparing for the next shot. The pavisier sometimes shouts as if you are living in a medieval video game, where every action carries double the pressure. You understand that each shot is not just killing an enemy, it is a signal to the entire battle. I am here. I am not weak. Knights glare at you with boiling rage, infantry leans back, riders pull back, and you continue reloading. Repeat the process. Aim, rotate the lever, breathe, shoot. This is the cycle, a sequence of chaos precisely organized only a crossbowman can comprehend. As the battle prolongs, you become the most crucial figure, the anchor for your comrade's survival and a nightmare for the enemy. Finally, you recognize the miracle. Despite rain and wind, mud, heavy armor, and knights hating you with extreme intensity, the crossbowman remains the most fearsome threat on the battlefield. One precise arrow, and everything can change. You are both artist and assassin, survivor and tactical center. When the battle ends and you are still standing, looking around, all the pain, sweat, mud, and anxiety transform into pride. You have accomplished what only a true crossbowman can, turning chaos into a weapon, surviving hell, and altering the fate of an entire battle with perfectly calculated shots. After leaving the light of the temple, you still feel Pathia's presence lingering with each step. Not because she is watching you. No, she has returned to her usual state, calm expression, eyes no longer distant. But the message she left still hangs in the air, like an invisible arrow lodged in your heart, awakening both fear and determination. You silently descend the stone steps, following the winding path leading down to the plains where the sunset gilds the old rooftops and verdant hills. Each step feels heavy with meaning, both given and yet unexplained. The prophecy, whether brief or vague, is a living force. It makes you wonder if one day you will have to confront its consequences, just as a crossbowman must face an arrow on the battlefield. The space around the temple still carries the scent of incense smoke and bay leaves, but now it mingles with the stone and thin mountain air, creating a feeling that is both mystical and weighty. Each stone, each blade of grass seems to remind you that you are but a small human in the vast picture of the universe. Yet each step carries the weight of life and death, like a crossbowman after battle, both fragile and powerful. Every moment of this journey becomes vivid, like a delicate dance. Each breath, each heartbeat can be judged, understood, or even distorted by the supernatural power Pathea has imparted. As you approach a grove of ancient trees, the wind rustles the leaves, carrying distant echoes as if the spirits of the past are watching. You pause, looking around, feeling as though you are stepping into a world where the line between reality and illusion, prophecy and actuality, becomes fragile. Pathea's words, though brief, can create currents that alter destiny. a king ascending the throne, a city-state falling, or an army being led to defeat. You remind yourself that any action you take next, however small or silent, could carry invisible yet devastating consequences. And that feeling is both terrifying and intensely awakening. You continue walking, and the path down the mountain narrows, stones slick and mud thick. The fatigue from recent battles still clings to your body, each muscle throbbing with every step. But now it is not only physical exhaustion, it is the fatigue of the mind, the strain of absolute alertness. Every step must be considered. One slip, and you fall into the abyss, rendering all the efforts Pathea conveyed meaningless. This is a new trial. No arrows, no pavis, only your body, your mind, and the fleeting power you cannot fully comprehend. Along the way, you encounter other pilgrims, old and young, rich and poor. They look at you with curiosity and a hint of reverence, as if recognizing that you have touched a prophecy. But no one asks anything. Each person is preoccupied with their own journey, their own rituals, and you realize that receiving Pathea's message is a profoundly personal experience. No one can intervene or explain it. Like a crossbowman after battle, where each shot is a life or death decision, the prophecy requires individual understanding and action. No one can act on your behalf. As the sun nears the horizon, the world grows so quiet that you can hear your own breathing. And then a strange sensation spreads, as if not only you, but the entire space around you is holding its breath, waiting for something. You cross an old stone bridge, your footsteps echoing like victory drums, yet also as a warning. And in that moment, you realize that this journey, even without arrows or pavis, is still a battle of will, vigilance, and endurance beyond what most people recognize. You have survived, but survival is not the reward. It is the condition for continuing to face the power that Pathea has just unveiled. You think of the steps, the streams, the swirling winds around Apollo's temple and wonder, if an arrow can change the outcome of a battle, then can a prophecy change the world? No more sunset, no more radiant light, only encroaching darkness and uncertainty, yet at the same time, a silent power permeates you. This is the power of understanding, of survival, of observing and acting deliberately in a world full of chaos. And when you finally stop, looking up at the distant mountaintop where Pathea sat, you realize, like a crossbowman on the battlefield, you have just passed the harshest trial, learning to become part of a power greater than yourself. Every action, every choice, every moment carries consequences. You stand there, weary, but filled with respect and awe, for you have understood something many will never grasp in a lifetime. Survival, focus, and the power to change fate do not come from weapons or authority, but from perseverance, awareness, and the ability to listen to things beyond ordinary perception. And so, as night falls, you step back onto the path down the mountain, carrying a feeling both fearful and strong. Pathia has spoken, the prophecy has been delivered, and you, the traveler, the witness, must continue to live, continue to learn, and continue to stand firm amid new challenges, no different than a crossbowman on the battlefield, always ready for the next shot, always ready to face the unpredictable. As the sacred whispers of Pythia gradually fade into the air, the pilgrims leave the temple with faces that mix awe and fear. But for those who understand deeply, the important aspect is not the specific prophecy, but the mechanism through which power is exercised. Pythia does not directly determine fate. She is a bridge, a mirror, reflecting the decisions of kings and city-states. And it is the Delphic priests who are the silent architects, transforming her fragmented ecstasy into coherent authoritative messages so that the ancient world can receive them without confusion. They are the recorders, analysts, interpreters, and choosers of how each utterance is conveyed, each word positioned to maintain both the mystical quality and practical strategic meaning. Sometimes a seemingly harmless prophecy is enough to change the political landscape. A city-state heeds the warning, avoiding conflict with a neighbor, thus preserving its forces. A king misinterprets the intent, decides to march, and brings disaster upon himself. These invisible arrows do not fly from archers, but from words sent with divine authority, carefully weighed by human intelligence. This balance is what creates the power and immense influence of Delphic. If Pythia is the bright flame, the priests are those who adjust the wind so that the light spreads exactly where it is needed. Imagine Sparta, where Leonidas stands before a fateful crossroads. When he hears the prophecy that a Spartan king may need to sacrifice himself to save the city, he does not simply obey divine command. He considers strategy, forces, the loyalty of his soldiers, and even the enemy's capabilities. The prophecy does not judge. It presents a map of possibilities, a series of paths that could unfold. Only human action determines which path becomes reality. And from those choices, destiny is formed. Pythia does not need to say yes or no. She provides a sequence of images and symbols, enough for discerning minds to recognize the direction, yet vague enough that no one is bound absolutely. The power of Delphic lies not only in the prophecy itself, but also in how the priests manage information. They keep records, monitor troop movements, secret treaties, and the political situation across city-states. In an era without mass media, Delphic is the center of strategic information. An envoy from Athens brings news of a revolt in Corinth. A Macedonian leader seeks guidance for the next campaign. The priests grasp everything, analyze the context, and shape how Pythia communicates the divine words so that they are both accurate and maintain the necessary mystique. Every preparatory step, every ritual performed in silence, is a testament to the absolute respect for the power they mediate. From bathing in the Castalian spring for purification, chewing bay leaves, sprinkling holy water, to observing the sacrificial goat, every detail contributes to the perfection of the ceremony. Every sound, every wisp of smoke, every reflected light in the room is regarded as part of the divine message. And when Pythia enters her ecstatic state, she is no longer human. She is Apollo, and Apollo, through her, speaks to the world. What makes Delphic unique is the seamless coordination between the divine and human. Apollo holds the power, Pythia conveys it, but the priests are those who shape how the message enters the real world. They know that direct, simple words can be misunderstood and may lead to disaster. Therefore, they carefully craft each word, consider each phrase, maintaining the divine nature but making it comprehensible. This is a subtle art where knowledge of politics, strategy, and human psychology is placed on equal footing with the mystical. Each prophecy carries weight. It can cause a confident king to march or compel a city-state to alter its strategy. It can sow fear, inspire, or even prevent a war. But regardless of the outcome, Pythia does not participate in human decisions. She merely reflects the truth so that each person faces their own choices. And through this, Delphic becomes a center of power that no one can ignore. Pilgrims, from kings to commoners, understand that entering the temple is not to seek comfort, but to confront a truth that they can, to some degree, control. The prophecy is an invisible tool, simultaneously a warning, created through the coordination of the divine, ecstasy, and human intellect. Apollo grants power, Pythia conveys it, the priests interpret and safeguard the message. The trio that forms the timeless strength of Delphic, where a woman seated on a tripod can shape politics, strategy, and the destiny of the ancient world. And perhaps the most wondrous thing is how it all blends. The divine is inseparable from the human. The human cannot dominate the divine. Every prophecy, every preparatory step, every ritual creates a delicate but powerful balance. Through this, Delphic becomes a symbol of supreme authority, where intelligence, mysticism, and strategy converge, where fate, power, and individual choice coexist, creating a force respected by the entire ancient world. Each oracle of Pythia was a test, an intellectual game that ancient leaders were forced to participate in, whether they wished to or not. No one entered the temple of Delphi seeking an easy answer. They came to confront themselves with the choices and illusions they carried. Croesus believed he was foretold victory, but the prophecy never said that Persia would fall. His own interpretation turned the prediction into a disaster for himself. Similarly, the leaders of Athens before the Persian invasion had to decipher the wooden walls, a cryptic puzzle that, if understood correctly, led to victory at Salamis, if misunderstood, could lead to destruction. The divine riddles not only challenged strategic thinking, but also shielded Pythia and the temple from direct responsibility if the outcome was unfavorable, because a straightforward prophecy could make kings reckless, whereas a riddle forced them to consider, scrutinize every assumption, every step, and bear responsibility for their own choices. This transformed Delphi into a center of spiritual and political power. The Temple of Apollo was not merely a place of prayer. It was a sophisticated mechanism for political coordination. City-states sent envoys, reporting agricultural issues, plagues, border disputes, even personal troubles of leaders. All were recorded, considered, and processed through Pythia and the priests, creating a network of information that no single city-state could control on its own. Delphi was the central nervous system of the ancient Greek world, a place where the divine, knowledge, and mortal power converged so subtly that even most foreign rivals had to tread carefully. The influence of the prophet extended beyond warfare or diplomacy. It seeped into daily life and the social structure. When city-states wanted to establish new colonies, Pythia did not provide maps or specific instructions, but her prophecy granted divine approval, a guarantee the Greeks considered supreme. The colonization of Cyrene, one of the wealthiest Greek colonies in Africa, began with a prophecy filled with poetry and mystery. Settlers ventured into the ocean, facing storms and the vast sea, yet in their hearts believed that Apollo approved, that they carried divine power upon their sails. These examples show that Pythia's power lay not only in predicting the future, but in shaping behavior, even political and social structures. When Sparta considered political reforms, the dual monarchy and new laws, her prophecy supported the efforts of Laius, the legendary lawgiver, helping Sparta consolidate its identity from military discipline to austere culture. Apollo became a co-author of Spartan society, and Delphi a sophisticated mediator of Greek politics, where rival factions and city-states often sought adjudication, creating a miraculous balance of power that no individual or city-state could fully manipulate. In times of crisis, Pythia's influence grew even stronger. Before the Persian Wars, her prophecy forced Greek leaders to confront death and danger, compelling them to make critical strategic decisions. Athens advanced based on warnings of fire and destruction, believing in salvation through the wooden walls, which helped them prepare for the Battle of Salamis, one of history's pivotal victories. Sparta, under the prophecy that a king must sacrifice himself to save the city, shaped Leonidas's fateful march to Thermopylae, where fate and courage intertwined. Even foreign powers recognized Delphi's importance. Lydia, Persia, Egypt, and the Eastern royal houses sent gifts, hoping for Apollo's favor or to understand Greek intentions better. Pythia became an informal intelligence network, not merely reacting to events, but guiding, motivating, and directing history. For nearly 1,000 years, the Delphic oracle was a decisive, silent, yet powerful actor, influencing every aspect of ancient life. However, divine power never endures unchanged. Pythia's decline was gradual under political pressure, philosophical skepticism, and social upheaval. Philosophers such as Xenophanes, Heraclitus, and even Herodotus began to question the authenticity of the divine and the true involvement of the priests in Pythia's message. Athens grew strong and confident, no longer relying on prophecy for every decision. The ancient world changed, and the gods could not adapt as quickly as humans. Wars, internal conflicts, and ambitions for power drew Delphi into political turmoil. These conflicts, along with the rise of Macedonia and later Rome, reduced the temple's prestige. Philip II compelled Pythia to issue a prophecy according to his wishes, demonstrating that royal authority began to supersede divine power. When Rome came to power, though respecting Greek culture, they had their own divinities and oracles, diminishing Delphi's influence. Finally, Christianity ended the temple's role. Theodosius I closed the temple in the late 4th century, and Pythia fell silent for the last time. Yet even as the temple collapsed, her legacy lived on. Pythia's voice echoed through history, etched into human imagination, influencing philosophy, literature, and art. Aeschylus, Sophocles, Plato, Socrates all reflected the riddles, warnings, and philosophy of the Delphic prophecies. Know thyself became a cornerstone of Western thought, and through riddles and oracles, Pythia continued to guide humans to confront choice, responsibility, and the meaning of fate. Delphi stands as evidence that true power lies not only in prophecy, but in the ability to shape human imagination and behavior. Pythia, through the breath of Apollo and the intellect of the priests, transformed prophecies into strategic, legal, and social instruments. She was a bridge between the divine and mortal, between uncertainty and order, between power and responsibility, compelling the ancient world to listen, reflect, and act upon the call of the gods. The physical strength and dexterity of the Urians were not merely a means of survival, but also the foundation of cultural identity and community spirit. Every race, every challenge of crossing rivers or climbing mountains was a silent ritual connecting people to the land, to the traditions of their ancestors, and to neighboring tribes. For instance, hill races were not only a test of physical endurance, but also an assessment of patience, intelligence, and strategic ability. A young warrior, standing before steep hills, jagged rocks, or rugged trails, had to choose the smartest path, regulate breathing, and maintain balance to conserve energy, much like in actual warfare. Every stomp, every leap, every lowering of the body to avoid slipping on rocks was a lesson in survival, a natural training without the need for manuals or coaches. In Urian culture, the body was not merely a tool, it was a measure of honor, a means of asserting oneself before the community. Children were thrown into harsh environments from a young age to learn how to live. They climbed hills, swam rivers, transported stones, hunted and herded livestock, not for pleasure, but for survival and tribal honor. Hardship was not a choice, but a necessity. Through these challenges, young warriors developed survival skills, endurance, and resilience that would later save their lives during raids or military campaigns. For a Urian, failing before terrain or water was not only a loss of honor, but also a loss of safety. Uria's cultural festivals were where survival challenges became communal rituals. River crossings, mountain climbs, javelin throws, or obstacle course tactics attracted participants of all ages or spectators. Elders and seasoned warriors observed, evaluated, and passed on experience to younger generations through looks, gestures, and quiet advice. These competitions were educational and traditional, but also an opportunity to gain recognition and reputation. A warrior who won a hill race or river crossing would be esteemed within the clan, trusted in strategic endeavors, and gained privileges in choosing a mate, while those who failed had to retrain their endurance and skills. Not only men, but Urian women were also trained through similar challenges, though on a different scale and scope. Girls who swam across icy rivers or climbed steep hills were highly valued for endurance and resilience, qualities respected on par with male warriors. Women's participation was not merely athletic, but a testament to endurance, patience, and importance in sustaining the community. A young woman demonstrating stamina and fortitude would become a role model within the tribe, trusted with important tasks, and contribute to the community's survival through offspring and leadership of the next generation. The harsh terrain and natural conditions forced the Urians to develop specific skills. They learned to use every surrounding factor, leaning to reduce impact when descending, using hands for balance, choosing optimal paths over slippery rocks, and calculating body force to traverse dangerous areas without injury. Rivers were not just challenges, but tools for training strategy and survival skills. Urians learned to dive to evade enemies, float with currents to reach targets, or swim with weapons, turning every physical exercise into genuine military skill. River crossing races were a natural form of competition, yet deeply ritualistic and cultural. Whoever swam fastest across a river filled with submerged rocks and strong currents gained honor and trust from the community. Spectators cheered, encouraged, sometimes mocked, or tested the warrior's spirit, creating an atmosphere tense yet exhilarating. The winner not only received material rewards, but also secured a high position in the clan and leadership in military situations. In Uria, conquering the terrain was conquering oneself and asserting social status. The physical strength, resilience, and combat ability of the Urians were intertwined with cultural and spiritual values. The ability to survive, adapt, and triumph in harsh environments was not only a condition for survival, but also a means to preserve tribal identity, traditions, and power. In the Urian world, the body was a weapon, a tool, and a symbol. Victory in hill races or river crossings proved readiness to survive, lead, and protect the community. These skills trained not only the body, but also sharpened intellect, agility, decision making under pressure, and deep understanding of the surrounding environment. This explains why Urian culture differed from other ancient civilizations. If the Greeks revered athletics as an aesthetic pursuit, and the Romans viewed sports as social ritual or entertainment, the Urians turned physicality into a survival strategy, tightly bound with culture, history, and community values. Every stride, every swim, Every climb was a journey testing survival ability and shaping both individual and collective identity. In Uria, humans and nature were one. Victory was not over an enemy, but over oneself and in mastering the land that had shaped them. Upon reaching adulthood, every Urian became a complete warrior, where body, mind, and combat skills merged. What they trained for on rivers, hills, and among rocks was not merely physical skills. It was how they built confidence, the ability to make instant decisions, and the capacity to face the harsh pressures of the battlefield. A river to outsiders might only be a challenge to swim across, but to a Urian, it was the first battlefield, where one learned to use the current, weave through rocks, dive deep to avoid danger, and control the body with agility. Every jump from one bank to another, every slide over jagged rocks, was a lesson in patience, observation, and strategy, qualities that could determine life or death in sudden tribal raids. The Urian arm was not only strong, but precise. Javelin throws, spear casts, and stone hurling, seemingly games, were in fact preparation for survival strategy. Training began from a young age. Short spears and small stones were used to teach children how to estimate distance, adjust throwing force, and coordinate body rhythm. As they matured, training intensity increased. Spears became longer and heavier, targets farther, and pressure greater. A warrior had to throw accurately while the heart pounded, breath quickened, and eyes tracked every movement of the opponent or target, for on the battlefield there was no time for hesitation. Victories in javelin or stone throwing competitions were not merely titles, they were proof of survival ability and social standing. A precise throw at a festival could secure a high position in the clan, a key role in raids, or even decision making power in community matters. Conversely, failure was not only personal shame, but could reduce the clan's trust in a warrior's survival and combat abilities. Thus, every throw, whether in a festival or training, was executed with utmost seriousness and a sense of responsibility. Alongside spear throwing, horseback riding was the highest art in Urian culture. Unlike Greek or Roman cavalry, riding in Uria was a combination of instinct, strength, and absolute adaptation to terrain. Urian horses were small but resilient, trained to climb slopes, cross rivers, and navigate dense forests. Training began in childhood without the need for elaborate saddles or reins. Children learned to maintain balance with their legs, guiding the horse through sensation and body pressure. They leaned, used thigh strength, coordinated breathing, and agility to remain steady while ascending or descending dangerous slopes. Horse races were not only a display of personal skill, but also an arena to affirm family reputation. Spectators gathered on hilltops, riverbanks, or meadows, cheering, shouting, encouraging, or mocking, creating a chaotic yet energetic atmosphere. Victory in horse races brought more than joy. It brought authority, respect, and control in tactical situations. A skilled rider could launch a spear or throw a javelin while riding at high speed, combining two essential skills into a deadly performance that could determine the outcome of an actual raid. The Urian Athletic Festival was where all these skills were displayed and crystallized. The festival space could be an open field, a riverbank, or a flat mountaintop. Children, youths, and adults participated, each carrying the memories, experience, and expectations of their family. Music, drums, cheers, and smoke intertwined, turning every match, throw, or sprint into a vivid ritual. The festival was not merely competition. It was a test of strength, willpower, leadership, and strategy. Victory could earn the respect of the entire clan. Defeat became a lesson for further training. Wrestling, javelin throwing, stone casting, hill running, river crossing, and horseback riding together formed a comprehensive training system. They not only trained strength and skill, but also nurtured teamwork, judgment, and courage. The Urian's survival depended on these abilities. A skilled warrior not only protected himself, but also defended the community, preserved honor, and enhanced the tribe's overall strength. Every exercise, race, and festival was a way for the clan to maintain and develop traditions, connect generations, and affirm the community's core values: strength, bravery, and pride. Amid the chaotic festival atmosphere, young warriors learned to coordinate with teammates, calculate every move, and prepare for unexpected situations, the very essence of Urian warfare. Whether racing up hills, crossing rivers, or maneuvering horses through perilous turns, all were tactical lessons embedded within play. These skills, when applied in actual combat, determined the survival of individuals and the reputation of the entire tribe. It was precisely the combination of rigorous physical training, vibrant festival competition, and flexible military tactics that forged the unshakable strength of the Urians. They were not merely warriors. They were living symbols of freedom, courage, and tribal identity, where victory was measured by strength, skill, and bravery, and where reputation was woven through every stride, every throw, and every galloping beat. The Urian spirit of sport was not merely a form of entertainment or exercise. It was comprehensive preparation for a warrior's life and survival in a harsh environment. Javelin throwing, stone lifting, sprinting, and horseback riding were all inseparable from combat life. Urian children grew up in a world where rivers, hills, and forests were both playgrounds and potential battlefields. Their first runs on slopes, first throws on the plains, or wobbly rides across streams built a body resilient and sensitive to every change in terrain. Every child, male or female, learned to read the direction of the wind, sense the flow of water, assess the stability of rocks or trees, and adjust their body in every motion, skills essential for survival as adults. Upon reaching adulthood, every Urian was a complete warrior, where physicality, intellect, and spirit were unified. Javelin throws were no longer games but tactical exercises. Warriors learned to aim at moving targets, calculate throwing force based on height, wind direction, and distance, while maintaining composure under pressure. A Urian warrior could stand atop a hill, observe enemies moving through a valley, and launch precise javelin volleys that left opponents unable to react. Similarly, the skill of lifting and throwing stones trained raw strength, but also taught the assessment of weight, distance, and momentum, survival skills necessary in sudden battles or raids. Horseback riding was both a sport and a martial art that Urians mastered early. Their horses, small, durable, and terrain adapted, were not for show, but for survival. Children learned to maintain balance, control speed, and coordinate breathing, legs, and hands to guide the horse along narrow paths, sharp turns, and rocky riverbanks. As adults, Urian riders could gallop at full speed, hurl javelins at moving targets, or lead assault squads with speed and precision that intimidated enemy infantry. Riding, javelin throwing, and spear casting combined into a deadly performance, simultaneously practicing tactics and preparing for sudden raids. Tribal athletic festivals were where these skills were tested and displayed. Festival spaces were often meadows, hillsides, or riverbanks, with spectators forming a circle, cheering, shouting, and encouraging. Every throw, sprint, fall, or jump was a test of strength, dexterity, and coordination. Wrestling, stone lifting, javelin throwing, and horseback riding intertwined with challenges of endurance, reflexes, and tactical intelligence. Victories at festivals brought not only personal honor but also reinforced family status, increased clan prestige, and affirmed leadership abilities. The Urian spirit of sport also had a sacred dimension. Running up hills or swimming across rivers was often viewed as a ritual connecting to ancestors and local deities. Before major competitions, warriors bathed in cold streams, rubbed ash and herbs onto their bodies as a purification ritual. Elders prayed, offered sacrifices, and requested strength, wisdom, and courage. They believed the spirits of ancestors would observe and bless the worthy, helping them overcome challenges with maximum strength and skill. Laurel wreaths, spirals, or geometric patterns painted on the body were not mere decoration, but talismans symbolizing strength, speed, and survival ability. Every match and festival reinforced not only individual strength, but also tribal cohesion. Urians learned to coordinate, lead, share strategies, and support one another. Combat skills, terrain awareness, and survival abilities were passed from generation to generation through sport. When facing enemies, warriors were accustomed to pressure, familiar with the terrain, and could act in unison. They knew that speed, endurance, and precise skill would determine survival. Even under Roman conquest and cultural changes, the Urian spirit of sport persisted in horseback riding, javelin throwing, and local festivals. Modern archaeology shows traces of river crossings, javelin ranges, training hillsides, and ceremonial spaces, proving that this sporting culture was an integral part of warrior life and spirituality. The Urians left no marble stadiums or grand temples, but they left a living legacy in their bodies, skills, and relationship with their land. Urian warriors were not merely elite athletes. They embodied a culture where physicality, spirit, and strategy were intertwined. Victory was measured not only by strength, but also by coordination, awareness, courage, and connection to community and ancestors. In every throw, sprint, jump, and full speed ride, the Urians demonstrated a complete warrior life, where sport and combat were inseparable, and where every personal achievement reflected the values of the entire tribe and the land from which they were born.